Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them. Crises precipitate change.
Secretly plotting your demise. I want to devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash your whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I want to make a super virus strong enough to cause blackouts in every single metropolis. Cause they don't want to unify us, so fuck it. Total anarchy and can nobody stop us. You see, late in the evening, fucked up on my computer and my mind starts roaming. I create like a heathen. The first cycles of this virus I can send through a modem. Infiltration hits your station. No Microsoft or enhanced DOS will impede. Society thinks they're safe when bingo, hard drive crashes from the rending. A lot of hackers tried viruses before. Vaporize your text like so much whiteout. I want it where file replication is a chore. Lights out, shut down entire White House. I don't want just a bug that could be corrected. I'm erecting immaculate design. Break the nation down section by section. Even to the greatest minds, it's impossible to find. I wanna devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash your whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I wanna devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash your whole computer system and revert you to papyrus.
We have already planned. The plan is programmed into every one of my 1,000 robots. We will not hesitate. We will destroy the Homo sapien. Now, please stay where you are.
I'm making some shit in my basement. Let me do it to him. Don't tell him no. I love you. Pete. I wanna develop a super virus. Better by far than that old Y2K. This is 3030, the time of global unification. Break right through they terminals, burn them all. Slaves to silicon, corrupt politicians with leaders and their keywords. FBI and spies stealing bombs, precipitate their plans in their face and catch the fever. Everybody loot the stores, get your canned goods. Even space stations are having a hard time. Peacekeepers seek to take our manhood, which results in the form of global apartheid. Ghettos are trash dumps with gas pumps, exploded and burnt out since before the Great Union. The last punks walk around like mass monks, ready to manipulate the database or break through them. Human rights come in 100th place. Mass production has always been number one. New Earth has become a repugnant place, so it's time to spread the fear that's fun to some.
Too long have we tried to extend our glorious empire out to the stars, only to be driven back.
I wanna devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus. I wanna devise a virus to bring dire straits to your environment. Crush your corporations with a mild touch. Trash the whole computer system and revert you to papyrus.
Hello, I am excited to be here with a guest right now. So in the episode that you just heard, we talk about how Antifa is used more like a moral license than a specific organization. However, that doesn't mean that specific organizations that operate under the name Antifa do not do significant operations in cities and stuff like that. And I thought to bring on one of our podcast listeners who used to be an Antifa member and is now doing some work in terms of building knowledge about what actually goes on with them and stuff like that. And you have a podcast as well, which is
Build Baby Build with Ty King. You can find it on YouTube, hopefully soon Truth as well.
great. You know, that's a Brian Kaplan book that just came out, right?
Oh, is that what they name? Oh, yeah, because when I type in build, baby, build, he's the other build, baby, build. That types up. Yeah, it's taken from an old Martin Luther King quote. It's essentially, we shouldn't burn, baby, burn. We should build, baby, build. And essentially, we need to stay away from riotous behavior and violence, in my estimation, because it doesn't work. It really doesn't.
Wait, so what I am most interested in, and I know what I would most like, and I think most people would most like to know, is one, when people are going to like Antifa meetings, for example, what is being talked about? How are they structured? How do they like communicate with each other?
There's varying degrees, right? You know, whenever I think of Antifa, I'm trying to break this more nuanced over time, but I think of so far the wannabes versus the devotees. Think of the devotees as your avowed communist, or those that they're there for the war, they're there for the action, they're there to get in the fight. Those are your devotees. They know kind of what comes with the territory. The wannabes are kind of like your rainbow-haired trans kids that come in with the Antifa flag, and they're there because they hate Nazis, they support certain policies, but they don't really know what they're engaged with. So kind of in the same way Hamas uses Palestinians, they're the human shields for the actual people within Antifa to operate. So more often than not, they're the first ones that will be arrested if action is called to by police and violence breaks out on both sides. The wannabes will often be the first to get hit, tackled, punched, arrested. So that way people within the devoted class can look and be like, see, this is what we told you. This is happening. And as far as the meetings, I never got into any higher up structure to where I could go to any higher up meetings. I know that that's a thing. I've heard whispers, but a lot of it is on the ground coaching. It's you go into these environments and they groom you on, this is what you say if the police come. This is what you say in certain instances.
When you say these environments, are these like subgroups that are happening at a protest, or is it like you go to somebody's house or an office or something?
Yes, yes, and yes, and particularly parties. So that's the thing, is it's so nuanced. Here in Eugene, talking to people that I know down in Texas or on the East Coast, Oregon has become such a radically indifferent environment to where post-Antifa and Black Lives Matter, there really is a different environment. Everyone here that I've been talking to lately is supporting the Trump assassination. Everyone wants every Nazi killed and arrested. Everyone supports every trans ideology under the sun. So the environment here in this town, in Eugene, Springfield, and in Portland particularly, is everywhere you go, you talk about these things. So you don't really need one central rallying meetup point. It's more about talking within your own circles, sending off texts, sending off whatever have you. It's really as simple as you can meet someone in a bar, have a drink with them, and by the end of that drink, you're exchanging informations. You think you're on the same page, and this guy's telling you, hey, be here Wednesday at 3:00. I'll meet you there, and then we'll figure out things from there. It is so broad and diverse in its tactics, and
so it's really organic. Yeah. What Antifa is the radicalized mindset, and the radicalized mindset allows for an organizational structure to organically develop through random meetings. I guess then my second question here would be, do you believe that more of the socialization of the Antifa stuff happens at in-person event or in like online message boards and stuff?
I would say online messaging boards, memes. You know, I don't know, anyone in my generation, I'm 27, there's like this weird thing to where everyone in my kind of age group, they'll say like in online meme speak, everything went downhill when Harambe died. You know, and everyone kind of followed these different memes and thought patterns, and everybody was in coordination. The conservative side was a little more fractured in doing what they would, but as far as like liberalism, far left memes, everybody walked in lockstep. And if you didn't walk in lockstep, well, then you're not on my page anymore. You're blocked. You don't get to be a part of the meme. You don't get to be a part of the messaging cycle. It's kind of like how we had all the good guy Joe Biden memes, and then less than a year later, oh, Joe Biden's running for president. That was one of the memes that would be continually shared. And that's really what detracted from Black Lives Matter and the original things with police violence and racial issues is there were like long structured detailed lists, and they had to meme it down and make it smaller and smaller and smaller to make it digestible for, quite crudely, any retard to digest, go out there and act on what they think they want to act on.
Yeah, well, and one thing I've noticed, you know, whether it's Black Lives Matter or what Antifa seems to broadly stand for, is it really seems much more focused, at least at the ground level, on the things that they are against. And they don't really take specific policies of things that they want to support, which leads to there being ideologically a pretty diverse group of people who might be antagonistic towards each other if they actually talked about their goals. How is that managed?
It isn't. So that's one of the things that made me leave in 2020 is as things began to heat up about the May 29th era, because for all those that don't know, Antifa did an insurrection in DC before January 6th. And I wouldn't even consider January 6th an insurrection so much as federal infiltration like they did with a lot of the Black Lives Matter protesters. But I got off on tangent. What was the original question? I'm sorry.
I was wondering how they dealt with like the different ideologies, but I want you to go down this. I want to know about May 29th. I don't know anything about May 29th. I was going to look that up and add something about it.
So I'd like to look up more myself because I got this tattoo on my wrist here, right? And it's May 31st. I was drunk and I got the date wrong. I think it was actually May 30th or something like that. So Antifa and Black Lives Matter went into DC, and I want to say it was like 8 days maybe of prolonged like protest, riotous behavior. They stormed the White House. Trump got locked down in the bunker. And while that was happening on the East Coast, over here on the West Coast, people were cheering. So in our case, one of the things that they did, freaking out because of what was happening in DC, is blue cities all across the country began to institute COVID measures in an effort to back off the protesters. So they actually set up a curfew at our Whole Foods that we have here in Eugene. And they said, if you pass the Whole Foods, you're within the perimeter zone. And then if you're on the outside, you can't come in. And then the people within the protest zone didn't get the text alerts, and then the people outside did. But what that created was actually one of the moments that made me want to walk away from Antifa, out of many. But that was a night that I essentially kind of saw a battle going down in the streets of Eugene. I saw kids get their heads caved in. I saw drones chasing after people. Cars try to run me and my friends over in the streets. Yeah. We were hopping over backyards, getting shot at with rubber bullets and tear gas. And it all stemmed from May 29th, but they just want to have us fixated on January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. Yeah. Well, the feds infiltrated January 6th using people dressed as Antifa members and people on the far right. All the video footage under the sun is out. And really, that's something that they did in Portland and in Eugene and in Springfield as well. They practiced the tactics of January 6th on the Black Lives crowd and on the Antifa crowd. And then they moved on to the conservative crowd, because ultimately what they want to do is get one side or another branded as a terrorist, so they can brand both sides as a terrorist, and then they can go after everybody under the sun. When in actuality, I think they need to look at Antifa like a gang.
That's really interesting. So can you, I don't want to push you to talk about anything you're uncomfortable talking about, but can you talk a little bit about how you might think of them as a gang?
Yeah, it's all tribal. It's all colors. So I have this theory, and it's a little crude, but I think it's a theory that pans out. When I explain to people, they're kind of like, oh, but it's the Wigger to Jihad theory. Mm-hmm. So it's no secret that we live in a country where the young white men specifically are completely isolated. Young men in general, but young white men in particular. So when I was growing up,
I should be aware. I don't know if this generation knows the Wig word. Like, I think we might have audience members who might think you just said the N word, because I don't think anyone has used it in 10 years. So for people,
it's a little dated.
It was a social community that, I mean, when I was in middle school, or like early middle school, like I dressed like this, like it was white kids who wore like sagging pants and listened to lots of like rap music and tried to emulate members of like famous members of the Black community at the time.
I got so much juice, you could call me Bruce Willis. Thank you, all my fans.
However, it mostly died out. Like we might do an episode on why like there's so little Black cultural influence in America anymore, because it is interesting. It used to be like a really dominant cultural force in America. And it I think it mostly died back due to the invention of the concept of cultural appropriation. Because if you tried to do that today, people would say, well, you're culturally appropriating. But it was really, really, really common for a period for people who are in Gen Z and are like, this wasn't a thing. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, well, that's where the theory comes in, right? Is I don't think that cultural appropriation and the calling of it out necessarily stopped it. I think it shifted. So you had all these young men who either felt disaffected because their family structures were falling apart and there was stuff going on at home, and they felt like they needed to take charge by putting on this tough guy attire. Or, you just had the little geeky white kid that needed a sense of belonging, which, I mean, in my case, I'm a juggalo, so that was me to a certain extent. I had my chains and my baggy pants and doing all that, hanging out with my buddies, doing drugs and shit. Like, it's a thing. But I think whenever gender came along, that it kind of became the next thing. And I have a video breaking it down further, but, we kind of go from wanting to emulate black, and then we go to metrosexuality where, visually speaking, a lot of people are wanting to kind of emulate being gay, and all these different things of what's acceptable, what's permissible, all these doors are being opened, but it's not about actually what's going on in the LGBT community or the African American community, right? It's the clothes, it's the look, it's the caricature. So you fast forward a couple years, well, kids aren't wiggers anymore, they're all turning trans. Well, these trans kids, it's not just light and fluffy anymore. They're starting to act like they're into the gangster culture, they're into the drugs, they're into the rap, they're becoming increasingly more violent, to where it's almost kind of replacing that. But in the sense that this gender ideology works as a religious replacement, now that that's not working anymore, you notice how a lot of these trans activists and a lot of these angry trans kids are now hopping over to jihad and Hamas support. And now they're all wearing the scarves, and now they're
yes.
all, I feel like it's step by step by step.
I haven't seen that. So what's interesting is, as they've moved to these more jihadist mindsets, they don't signal it in online spaces in a way that conservatives can see as easily. So I'm wondering if you could talk about, like, is this like pretty normalized among like the trans activists right now who are in the Antifa movement, like the jihadi mindset, the like that's how you prove you're extra serious?
So all I can see, a lot of it's coming from external factors. I'm not really around any ex-Antifa members anymore. I just met one ex-Antifa member, which is a story we can get to if you want. But separate from that, a lot of it's what we're seeing with online. Like, you got that little trans non-binary girl that's like, Allah doesn't see gender. This is the Quran. You're seeing this kind of explosion online from the LGBT community of queers for Palestine, radical insane stuff. I was leaving work the other day. I work at downtown Eugene, and it was just all this Project 2025 is a white conservative jihad, but next to those same signs was like free Palestine and Gaza and all this shit simultaneously. It's identity hopping, and these kids are so confused that what all of this has done over Black Lives Matter and Antifa, all the kids that are basically screaming for the death of the Jews right now, whether they realize it or not, they were groomed for this. They were groomed to see through the lens of oppressed versus oppressor. And they don't realize right now that they are playing holy war. And you can't convince these people that they're acting religious, because so many people here in particular, we have generations of kids who not even their parents or their grandparents were religious. So when they start acting religious in themselves, they can't see it. And if you try to make that comparison, they will flip out on you.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's also interesting to see what causes people to flip out, because those are usually like evolved social triggers to prevent them from engaging with ideas that might be threatening to their world perspective. So that also, has me believe that if they could recognize that it is, I mean, that's where the anger is coming from, right? You don't get angry if somebody's making a totally, pointless or not on point accusation. So that's really interesting. And I have noticed that jihad stuff. I should dig into it more, because like I hear about it and it seems to be happening at like their parties and stuff. Okay. I guess here's another question I have. So you mentioned like people get activated by like someone you meet, and then they're like, oh, be at this event on this time. Do you know the core channels through which they are like activating or reaching people? Is it typically like you'd get an email or a phone number, like a meme would start, or like how would people find out to be at an event?
I think it's all of the above, and it's also convoluted. And the thing is, social media offers certain protections for certain political groups that want to organize. So I think Andy No did a story on it about a year or two, to where certain people can post about their organizing protest, and then others can't. Some people can post about, you need to go counter this, and they'll have their stuff removed. And then the other side will be like, you need to go counter this, and then they'll have their stuff removed. I think social media is tinkering with this in coordination with governments. I mean, we've seen the fascism for ourselves. We've seen the unholy alliance of corporations and government and big business in the Biden administration. While everyone's been blinded because, yay, Trump's gone, we don't have to pay attention now, they've been ramping it up and ramping it up and ramping it up. And a lot of this too, after this week, I can say this solidly, a lot of this is criminal in nature. And it's not that the kids themselves are a part of criminal elements. I believe that outside gangs and outside underworld organizations are feeding off of this. They are sending people into the protests and into these groups. And I believe that they are using children. I believe that they are using drug mules. And the way it was explained to me in some of my investigations this week, when a riot is happening on this side of Portland, and all the police are here, what's going on over here? We don't think about that, right? Because all the cameras are over here, all the people are over
Yeah.
here.
Well, I
All
think
the, oh, go ahead.
a lot of this can be contextualized as malevolent, and I think that people just aren't really thinking through that it is only organic that criminal organizations would become involved in this. If you have a group that can pull police presence to a specific area, and that group regularly consumes drugs, illegal drugs, that the criminal organizations already need to bring in, so they're naturally going to have connections within those communities, and the connections are likely going to be high level within both communities. So let me explain what I mean here. If, for example, I'm an organization that's running, cocaine or ecstasy or something like that, and I was going to have somebody who was a distributor, making money distributing that for me, who better to be a distributor than a high level member of a social organizing group, right? So it's very likely that important individuals within both groups would have a level of overlap. And so that the groups would use these individuals to put people in specific locations to distract police. And here's the thing: if you're running drugs, like you're a cartel, you're going to also be doing human trafficking. You're going to also be doing like all of the bad stuff comes together. And so I think that there's sort of two sides of this. Is I think that people may be misunderstanding this as being more Machiavellian than it might really be. Not that it's not like evil people who are doing this, but does the person who ends up leading a Antifa group where they often have parties where there's ecstasy and then becomes a distributor for a local criminal syndicate, does that person not care about Antifa's aims? No, they do care about Antifa's aims. But does that person also get maybe extra money from the criminal organization? Does the criminal organization have the capacity to maybe lay out bricks for them or lay out guns or do other things like that that can make their job easier if they just move the date or let them know so that it overlaps with and they may not know that this is what's happening that day, a human trafficking, big movement of supply can go on. Because that's actually kind of hard to do when you're doing big human trafficking moves, because typically they get sort of consolidated at safe houses, and then they need to move them, like distribute them to other safe houses.
Bit by bit, rather than training them out, essentially.
Yeah, so doing something like a riot can be very, very useful in terms of doing that, and in terms of concentrating a customer base over a period of time. I mean, I bet you if you look at something like Chop or Chaz, like the amount of money that was made by criminal organizations while that was operational must have been astronomical.
Yeah, like what was going on in those downtown buildings? They're surrounded by skyscrapers. They took over police. What was going on behind the walls? Because we see people doing whippets and dancing, and some people are going in and want to make it seem silly. Others want to make it seem dark. Or others want to make it seem like there's nothing going on. But and the thing is a lot of their distributors, you're thinking adults, man. Kids. They're using homeless kids. They are using the disaffected youth, the kids that are running away from their families. Kids are easier to use. Kids are easier to manipulate. Kids are easier to get rid of.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that it's likely that you have, what's the word I'm looking for here? Some of the kids are likely probably not also homeless. The best distributor for these organizations are often rich kids, because they have lots of people with lots of money they can sell to. So, your elitist, and even if you're talking about older, like the ideal distributor for them is the person who runs the Antifa network at a local rich college.
And all this comes out of the U of O too. Like a lot of Antifa's top people and a lot of people from there, a lot of it's U of O. I used to live like a block or two up the road. Like I was at the central starting point for where a lot of the protest meetups would go. And yeah, it's all college based. So much of it is, and the schools encourage it and they bow down to them. And I mean, Eugene, so much of it, we're controlled by Chinese interests. I mean, Nike operates out of Eugene and they use Uyghur slave labor. It's like, there's so many like foreign connections. The West Coast has become such a completely different country than the rest of America. I'm realizing we don't operate the same way other people do. It's a new culture.
My intuition would be that it is not intrinsically that Chinese organized crime is disproportionately in working with Antifa. It's just that it's probably whoever is the the largest and most organized local crime group is
Yeah.
going to be the one that's going to naturally work with them. And most crime groups have an ethnic component, i.e. they're either like Latin or Black or Chinese, or probably the only one that Antifa isn't going to accidentally start working with is one of the, like Nazi or white criminal groups. But I mean, who knows? One of my things about Antifa is I'm always shocked that when you were there, did they do the black shirt thing?
I did.
Oh, so like, do they not know who the black shirts were historically? Like, so you might not know.
I know the brown shirts, but didn't know there's black shirts
so the
actually.
brown shirts were Hitler's group, but he made them after the black shirts, which were Mussolini's group. The very first fascists called their foot soldiers the black shirts. That is, and then Hitler wanted to copy it, but he didn't want it to be exactly black shirts, so he called them the brown shirts. But yeah, Mussolini's black shirts. Actually, their famous phrase was something like "fuck around to find out." Okay, I'm gonna.
That's fucking familiar. Jesus. And I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm years disconnected from this, but it's like I'm still learning like the extent to which my behavior took me to the historical things that I was tinkering with that I had no idea. Because like we used to write phone numbers on our arms of our contacts for if we got arrested, and that was to simulate the Jews. We would always talk about it. It's like the Holocaust. Here we are with our numbers on our arms. Here I am with my husband's phone number on my arm. And you would look down, and the goal was to like make you subconsciously feel like you were facing the same historical relevancies and situation as them.
Powerful. By the way, the term I missed was "me ne frego," which means I don't care, or like I don't give a S is probably a better translation.
And that's the embodiment of Antifa. If you could sum it up all in one slogan, I don't care, or do what thou wilt. That's really what it boils down to.
Can you talk about, is there any other psychological tools or techniques you remember that helped you think of other people as Nazis?
The ISIS comparisons, you have rednecks coming in with trucks and American flags. So a lot of people like to paint the symbolism of, well, look at ISIS over there with their Toyotas and their ISIS flags. So whenever people would come in rallying with the trucks, it would make you feel like that was going on. There's a lot of instances people will just go and they will just Hitler salute just to piss you off because they know you're a dumbass and they know you're going to freak out. So they'll go on the other side of the hill and they'll Nazi salute. Yeah. And that'll get people enraged. But for me, when I was going out, majority of the time I was drunk or high. I was on narcotics. I was on alcohol. I was impaired, just like most people in Antifa are, because a lot of them are so dependent that it's at all times. Like, why are they so confident? It's a chemical induced ego that drives their confidence and narcissism. You can't talk sense into an alcoholic. You can't talk sense into a meth head. You can't convince someone on ketamine that you know more than them.
Yeah, well, and it also makes a lot of sense then. So I absolutely believe you're right there, and it would make sense that they would do that. And this is why, going to a protest to try to diffuse them, to try to talk with them in that environment is probably a very bad idea. And instead focus on, online conversations and stuff like that. That makes a lot of sense.
And now talking to conservatives though, because I had a jacket, it was black on the outside, camo on the inside. So I would just flip it out and I'd kind of play both sides. The conservatives, they were there to talk. And that's just something I want to highlight there too. Through all my time there, they're wanting to speak. They're wanting to pray with me. They're wanting to share stories, and they're wanting to be like, hey, this is wrong. That helped a lot. So if you do go to these events, do try to talk.
Yeah, because I came to the right, I wasn't like originally on the right, and the right is like really accepting, like way more than I would have anticipated. I would say though it's different depending on the type of right event that you're at. But one of the main types of right events, like the type that really likes Trump, they're like everyone you talk to is just so excited to share their conspiracy theory with you.
Yeah, it's fun.
And there'll be all sorts of different counteracting conspiracies, but they're like, oh dude, I gotta bring you in on the conspiracy. And you might think it's interesting how like anti-government they are, anti-authority they are, like everything's this big effing conspiracy.
And that's the thing too, is like that's actually how Antifa, at least I mean it started way back in the 30s, but in the modern day, from my perspective going into it, those were the types of people in Antifa that drew me in, like the Occupy Wall Street people. They're like, hey, do you know what's really going on in the Middle East? Do you know what's really going on with UFOs? But as the federal government came in and all these outside forces came in and infiltrated Antifa, which I do believe they did, just like they did the Proud Boys or any other group, they turned it into a spiritual trap to where they said, you can no longer question, you can no longer explore these things. And I mean, you look over on the right now, and all these people that I knew who are super religious, who hated other religions growing up.
Yeah.
Now they're sitting back like, huh, that's no different than my religion. Or, huh, I want to know a little bit more about this. And they're like kind of actually pulling together in a spiritual collective that I thought the left was going to do.
Yeah,
You know?
it's been very interesting to see the well, yeah. I mean, like for example, like Andrew Tate's an effing Muslim. Like I always point this out to people.
I always forget that.
This dude's a Muslim, and he's like the #1 right-wing speaker. But yeah, no, it's been really interesting how it's come to resemble. Yeah. All right. Well, this has gone longer, so we're gonna have a stupidly long episode on Antifa now. It looks like, but I appreciate your time, and your channel is again for people checking.
Yeah, Build Baby Build with Ty King.
Okay, great. So named after that Brian Kaplan book, Build Baby Build, or Martin Luther thing. Go check it out and have an absolutely spectacular day.
Peace and love, you guys. Appreciate you having me on.